Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing? Drop some comments in the chat. Let us know how you're doing during these ever so interesting times. Michael Savage, why don't you go ahead and turn on your audio and your video? How are you doing, sir?
Good. Glad to be here.
Excellent, excellent. I can see you and hear you well. Can you see me and hear me well?
I see New York City. That's beautiful. There's just some dude in the way
Yeah,
of a great view. No, I'm teasing. It looks beautiful.
this is the new home office here. Let me life can be worse. So welcome everyone. I wanted to give everybody a couple minutes to come on in. We're joined from people all over New York City, all over this country, all over the world. We have people tuning in from everywhere. And so, when we originally designed this event, it was surrounding COVID. We had done some of our TLT talks around, well, you're stuck at home, you can't leave the house. We talked about meds, meditation, exercise, diet, sleep. We had Leonard Steinberg, who's chief evangelist of Compass, on the show to talk about, business implications. And he really hit home on routine and habit and staying in flow. We had my wife, Julie, on our show talking about, health and how to really beef up your immune system so that you can be ready for anything, COVID or not. We had Michael Savage on our show to talk about, again, routines and everything. And the show was going to be about, you just got into that zone of keeping your routines, getting into place, and now it's back to the real world. And so the show is going to be about the return to, normal life, quote unquote, except the reality is, we're not going back to normal, we're going to new. It would be naive to think that things will be exactly the same and that it's going to be business as usual, office, retail, things of that nature will shift, business will shift, work from home will shift. And the conversation was going to be about, life past COVID. But that's not the conversation I feel to be having anymore. The conversation today is about George Floyd. The conversation today is about Breonna Taylor. The conversation today is about Ahmaud Arbery. It's about equality. It's about, our future together. And, Tony Robbins is, I think a master strategist. And, I've spent about 10 years now studying under him and traveling the world with him. And I think he's just got some incredibly effective strategies around, really huge conflict resolution. And I thought that would be relative, to share and pay forward. And I can't imagine a better person to speak on these things than my dear friend, Michael Savage. He's been with Tony Robbins for over 20 years as one of his head coaches. He's very involved in civil rights and things of that nature. And so I wanted to keep my intro really brief, pass it to the man of the hour, Mr. Savage. The floor is yours, sir. Right here for anything you need. Thank you very much for your time and for being with us. And for everybody out there, I'll be navigating the comments. If you've got questions, if you've got comments, feel free to type things in the chat. I'll be monitoring, and if necessary, I'll cut off mic and I'll go to some questions. And then, it's meant to be pitch and catch, not meant to be much of, just a lecture. It's meant to be interactive. So welcome everyone. Michael, thank you for being with us. The floor is yours, sir.
Oh, thank you. First of all, really appreciate being here. I see some friends that I know, folks that I've traveled the world with for years. Their names are showing up in the chat. So hello. And some new friends as well. So I'm going to speak today as if this is a fresh and new audience. And we're going to dive in. We'll cover some of the basics around re-entry from COVID, because no matter where you're at, in most places are in phase 1, phase 2, or phase 3 of reopening. People are starting to get their groove back, and I want to talk about some of that briefly, and then let's have the real conversation about what's going on now and what our responsibility is in that conversation. So thank you for that intro. I'm going to go ahead and start off with some of the stuff that we prepared last time around COVID, and I just want to make sure that we can see the screen. So let me go to share screen. And there should be a big LitVac team logo in the middle of the screen right now. Is that we've got? All right, perfect. Good. So the first thing I want to start out with is a quote that goes far beyond personal development. As much as I love Jim Rohn and Tony and all the guys that we learn from and that have been mentors in our life, go back to Marcus Aurelius, and he said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." And I think one of the reminders that we have to have, whether it's leaving quarantine, and no matter what perspective, how you're handling the business that you're in, how you begin to engage with customers or your employer, or start to restructure for anyone who's had a tough time, you have to realize that the power first comes from taking care of this thing up here. And for years, Tony has talked about the mindset and the emotional state and the mental state we have to access in tough times. So we're going to go into this, but I think one of the pieces, there's so many outside events that are fighting for our attention. There's COVID and the World Health Organization. Are they right or are they wrong? And who's for them and who's against them? And then there's politics involved with that. Do we follow what one side says versus the other? Or then, in the middle of all this, we face this challenge in social justice, and we feel compelled to do something. No matter what side of the fence you're on, you feel compelled to do something. And then the question is, what do I do? And if we start to act towards re-entry out of COVID, towards things that we believe in socially or politically, before first getting in a great state that allows us to be effective, we may be hijacked by emotions. So we must first maintain, that power over our own mind. And we're going to talk about some elements of that today and how it plays a role in all of this stuff. We have to stand guard at the door of our mind as well. Our good friend Jim Rohn, as well as the good man himself, Joseph McClendon III, constantly remind us, stand guard at the gates of your mind. And that means there's a lot of information that's fighting for our attention. Social media, the regular media, while they all want to put information in front of us, they have an agenda for clicks and ratings. And so we have to be careful of what we allow in, right? Curate those rivers of information that are coming your way, especially as you re-enter out of quarantine, and make sure that you have things that you feel are feeding your soul and are creating a sense of peace that can allow you to be productive in your outcomes. I think that's important, right? We have to stand guard because they're fighting for our attention. Look, everybody from, McDonald's to Bed Bath & Beyond to the news to every politician trying to get reelected is all fighting for, a little bit of space up here. So you want to be very careful of what you allow in. Be very, very careful, especially in today's day and age. That being said, something that I think every client that I've talked to in the last 3 weeks has talked about, and we have whole communities that are feeling this right now, is fear. And I've heard this 100 times from Tony, that while, fearing fire is a real thing, you can turn that fear into power. That's why we do the fire walk at our live events. Matter of fact, whether people fear it or not, there is an Unleash the Power Within happening in August in Dallas. And there will be a couple thousand people that face their fear. They tell it that it's a liar, and they will storm across 12 to 15 feet of hot coals. And on the other side of that, they'll make some new decisions for their life. I learned how to do that at 14 years old, right? So I know that fear is a liar. But what has fear done over the last 2 or 3 months to not only affect people during COVID, but all the way into, us trying to face these injustices we're seeing socially in a healthy way? And, you feel you want to act in some way, and then fear kicks in. Well, understand this. I'm going to start with the toilet paper. And the reason I want to start with the toilet paper is because this just got way out of control. And I think everybody needs to laugh for a minute before we get into some of the tense talk. But I wrote all because of toilet paper, right? And here's why. This scene is one of the earliest viral videos of people fighting over toilet paper during COVID. It came out of Australia. If you look in the bottom left-hand corner, it says Credit Twidney, West Sydney. You have a couple people in Australia who are fighting over toilet paper during the early stages of COVID. Why did this happen, and how did this start a run on stores in Europe and in the US and all over the world for toilet paper. Well, most people have very short-term memories today, and I don't know if they remember, but Australia was on fire. Like 40% of it was on fire right before COVID. And all of the masks that were used during that time period were used to keep soot out of people's mouths because the country was on fire. So when COVID hit and everybody was told they needed masks, there weren't any masks left in Australia. Somebody said that you could take toilet paper and fold it and put it under a bandana, and then it would act just like a mask. And so there's a run on toilet paper all over Australia, and this video hits. Somebody's hoarding toilet paper. There's a shortage of toilet paper. People are fighting over next thing you know, the world is going nuts, buying toilet paper, thinking there's a shortage. And there wasn't. But fear drove the world insane. And nobody clarified and verified, if I can use some Tony terminology, nobody clarified and verified to find out what was really going on. Now let's take it a step further. CNN Business, a month or two later, cops in the toilet paper aisle, grocery stores add extra security. You've got to be kidding me. Right, but this is what fear does. So you must remember, fear is a liar. Never let things that take your power away temporarily rest inside of you and take root. Right? Fear is a liar. You have more power than that. Whether it's about how you re-enter, whether it's about getting your business restarted, or whether it's about standing up for what is right and just when you see injustice, you must lean in past those fears. How we re-enter, not only re-enter, from COVID, but re-enter serious discussions around how we move, past these challenges we're facing as a nation, and really begin to have real talk and honest discussions about race relations in this country and about equality. Both lean into the man on the right in this photo. Tony years ago had the opportunity to sit and interview Nelson Mandela. Tony's worked with, leaders all over the world, and he's constantly curious about the perspective that they have. Right. And one of the questions that Tony asked Mandela after he was wrongfully imprisoned or quarantined for 27 years was, how did you survive? How did you survive that? Mandela kind of gave Tony a look. I'm giving you Tony's recount of the story. He kind of gave him a look, and Mandela stood up. Now, when the president stands, everybody stands. So everybody else in the room stood up. So Tony stands up in this very quiet, very direct demeanor. Mandela said, "I didn't survive. I prepared." So for some of you that have been in survival mode in any context of the challenges that we're facing, you must shift that state inside of you to preparation. And we know that Mandela made some of the most powerful shifts when it came to apartheid and racism, as well as politics, because he was bold enough to prepare himself. Now, what did he do? He learned the language of his oppressor. He learned Afrikaans. He learned their political system. He learned how they moved, what they did. So 27 years later, when he came out, he was able to create massive change very quickly in a country that was torn apart from racism and apartheid. As a matter of fact, he was so bold in his preparation that he actually put those that oppressed him in his cabinet. He adopted some of them. He shook the hands of de Klerk, who put him in prison, and said, "Let's create peace." He was able to maintain absolute emotional control. I don't know about you guys. I say this all the time, but if I was wrongfully in prison for 27 years, I don't know if I would come out peaceful. But Mandela prepared. And so we talk about the Mandela principle. And the Mandela principle is about preparation. It's about being principled and preparing for what's next, right? Knowing that these cycles are going to happen, whether it's because of COVID or whether it's because of a natural economic cycle or whether it's because of social injustice. These cycles are going to happen where there is unrest and uncertainty in our life. And what we have to take ownership of as individuals is, are we prepared? Are we prepared to shift and lead? Right? Are we ready to adopt the leadership principles that real leaders show up with in times like this? Right? Because we know, economically speaking, COVID kind of came right at a point where we were looking at an economic fall anyways. As much as we'd like to blame it on COVID, we were at the height of an economic summer, best market we had seen in a long time. And after spring comes summer, after summer comes fall, after fall comes winter. Right? So are we preparing ourselves for winter? Right? And how are you re-entering? Are you re-entering buying into, the media saying it's the best market ever? Or are you coming in and saying, I'm hopeful it's the best market ever. I'm going to see it better than it is, but I'm going to prepare for it as it is, which is we went through a couple recessions and I want to prepare and see how I re-enter in winter. What's my winter strategy? Right? Tony at Business Mastery talks about this mentality of being a gladiator in winter, right? That winter is our season and this is our time, right? Show me your fears, show me your limitations, I will give you results. There's a lot of people that are afraid to come back out and re-enter. Look, I'm at my family's farm right now. We had a barbecue this weekend, and 20 feet from where I'm sitting right now, my sister-in-law stood for almost an hour, 5 to 6 feet apart from the other 40 people that were here for a family gathering. And while everybody kind of maintained distance and, we all kind of respected everybody's space, my sister-in-law hadn't been around more than 2 people in 2.5 months. And she is not the kind of person that falls into anxiety or is uneasy. But 2.5 months in quarantine definitely shifted her comfort levels. And so we have to think about like our reentry and make sure that we're managing our state to put ourselves in the most powerful place that we possibly can. And to tap into that, we have to go back to understanding where most people's mindset are. After 2.5 months, a lot of people are saying, I want freedom, except we're not able to go back and re-enter a world that feels good right now, because almost every city in the United States is facing protests because we've seen things on video that none of us should ever have to see. We've seen things on video that none of us should ever have to see. And so while we want to celebrate freedom, the challenge is we're walking right back into a hard conversation. And that requires us to check in, right? What physiology is going to help us? If we curl up, if we get tense, unfortunately, that's not a physiology that's going to serve our body to help us make great decisions as we move back out in the workplace or as we start to approach hard conversations that we all need to have, right? If you go into a hard conversation tense and body language is 55% of our communication, the challenge is, even if you have the best intentions to be peaceful, if you come in with a tense physiology or an aggressive physiology, all you're sending is a message of aggression. It's interesting because when we see certain police officers, some of them with very good intentions showing up, when they show up in such a tense physiology, that just contributes tension to what could be an otherwise peaceful place. And again, I know a lot of them have good intentions, but they need deeper training on what that means. And for those of us who are going to re-enter and maybe engage in those conversations or have to go back into the workplace, if we have a customer in front of us that looks tense, it's likely because they haven't interacted in a long time. So physiology, 55% of communication is body language. We have to pay attention to our physiology now more than ever, for the sake of those in our community who are just uncomfortable re-engaging, for the customers that are working with us that may not be comfortable. We need to check in on our own. But most importantly right now, because we have neighbors that are in a lot of pain and just need to feel love from us, what's a physiology that can exude love and understanding and that promotes peace? We want to make sure that we're paying attention to that. Then what are we focused on? That goes back to just stand guard at the gates of your mind. Focus on the things that are going to be meaningful, right? Make sure that, you're putting things in front of your mind that build confidence, that build understanding, right? Really, really curate where you're taking news and information from right now. And be very, very careful. And language. This is where we all have to be careful, right? Language has meaning. And as we move into talking about, the challenges with race relations in the country, we're going to talk a lot about language. Words that are appropriate, words that are not, words that communities have asked us to embrace, and words that can create tension or challenge. And we want to be very careful because it's sensitive, and rightfully so. So we want to check in on our state, make sure we focus on a couple of these pieces as we re-enter from COVID, and understand this, that any words that we use consistently create emotion and create the experience we live in, right? Tony has said this for years. The words that you speak with emotional conviction become the life you live. This is your heaven or this is your hell. And as we talk about how we re-enter, the opportunity we have to re-enter, right? The things that are in front of us that we can take advantage of. We have to be careful of the language that we use to describe that experience. And when we talk about, challenges or atrocities in communities around us, we also want to be careful not to use softening words and to call those things out for what they are, because that's a time where reframing is not necessary. We just call it for what it is. So I want to make sure that as we move forward, we set a tone about leadership, because I think all of us could agree on this call today that right now, leadership is going to happen in our communities, and that's what's going to change our country. It's said on the header as we came in that whether it's coming back from COVID or looking at the lives of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, and they're just a short list of a long list of people that deserve justice, that all of our communities need leadership, our businesses need leadership, our homes need leadership. And Tony for years has talked about these 3 simple mandates that we all need to adopt. And so I want to cover these before we go in, because I think if all of us walk away today leading with intention, we can go back in our communities and begin to create a transition towards a place where everyone feels safe and everyone feels accepted and feels honored for who they are in our communities, no matter their race, their gender, their background. But today we're going to talk about race and why that's important. So number 1, see things as they are, but not worse than they are. So with COVID, as we get more and more news from the World Health Organization and Fauci and Dr. Birx and other doctors and immunologists and virologists, and they start to back away from a lot of the challenge data, we want to see it as it is, not worse than it is. As it is, not worse than it is. Right? And you have to choose what that is for you, but you may find yourself from time to time getting feedback from friends or from your community. Be open to that, right? You don't have to take feedback, but when someone offers it, it's probably because they care. So maybe say, maybe not. I'll consider it. I'll see if that resonates with me. But I think it's important to see things as they are, not worse than they are. And in the case of police brutality, in the case of protests, and the gamut goes from peaceful protests to riots, right? We have to see things as they are, but not worse than they are. When it comes to the political climate, we have to see it as it is, not worse than it is. Right? We have to be careful not to get hooked and to apply critical thinking, right? Meaningful thinking. We have to look at our EQ, not just our IQ when it comes to things like this, and make sure that we're leaning in, seeing things as they are, not worse than they are. But as a leader, we don't just sit there. We move on to create a vision for things getting better. Create a vision for things getting better. And in every community right now, there is a fight for people sharing a vision of what's better. And there's a ton of perspective out there right now. And what a lot of people do is they fall into confirmation bias. They want to be right. And I think right now we have to step back and ask ourselves, what are the pieces that align in all of this? What are the patterns that are showing up on all sides that we can come to agreement on? And as leaders, how do we help people focus on that first, so that we can start productive conversations that lead to real change? And then we have to make that vision as real as we can now. And that means as leaders, we can't be silent. We can't be quiet about making the vision real. We have to take action towards it, even if we don't know exactly what to do. And I think right now there's a lot of people with perspective, and a lot of the fear and anger that shows up, the tension in their body shows up, is because they want to fight for their voice on all sides, but many of them don't have all the answers. And some of them have some of them fear some of the answers that they're even representing. You can't imagine the calls I've had this week. But the idea is, if you have a vision and it's better than things were, you've got to start taking action to make it real. Not just posting things, real conversations, real action, getting out of the community, shaking hands, doing the things that move social change forward, right? And if you make a decision but you're presented with new information that gives you new light. Be flexible in your approach. There are still people that are fighting for people to be under restriction and live in quarantine as if the data that we had 2 months ago is still valid. They have not become flexible in their approach to re-looking at how we all stay healthy. There are people that made a decision that they wanted to fight for equality, but they're using the same civil rights tactics from the 60s and 70s, and they haven't adopted new, more effective approaches that we have available today. So you can stay committed to your convictions, but you have to be a person who's flexible in your approach. So with that, we're going to exercise the flexibility that we wanted to and lean in to the conversation about what's going on, in the United States, the challenges that the Black community is facing, and what we can all do to understand and appreciate their world and how we can help. And the reason I say understand and appreciate their world is because I learned from Tony years ago, fundamentally, that if we're going to create change, we can't just diagnose a situation and then apply what we believe is help. Because diagnosis means we create a disconnect between who we are and a challenge that our neighbors and our communities are facing. We have to understand and appreciate. And it's not even just enough to understand, because we can say, I understand what they're going through, but that doesn't affect me. And unfortunately, that's what a ton of communities have done for years in this country. We have to understand and appreciate their world. And appreciation means putting ourselves in their shoes. Now, I have a personal story that I'll share in a minute to talk about like why I've chosen to be very involved in civil rights almost since birth. But I want you to understand that we all have to do that. By the way, it's great to also understand and appreciate the perspective of good law enforcement, police officers in our communities that want to do the right thing. We should be understanding and appreciating their world as well. We do not have to understand and appreciate the world of people who abuse their authority. So let's draw a distinction in that. We want to understand and appreciate the world of all parties involved. But there's a line, a moral line that is crossed where we no longer have to understand and appreciate, and that our silence makes us complicit if we don't speak up. And the challenge is that today people think that they have to pick a side. And most people hover in the middle somewhere, not knowing what to do. While there are parties that are polarized, all with their own perspectives, the majority of people in the world kind of live somewhere in the middle. And I picked this meme just to say, like, there are some people who are absolutely outraged at what happened to George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery. There are people who absolutely do not condone looting and rioting, but 100% support protest. And there are some people who support good police officers, and there's some people who support all three. And it's okay to be in limbo there until you can figure out how to answer and how to engage in a way that's true for you. The key is you have to engage. Sitting back is not the answer, especially when it comes to racism. And, our country has been challenged by this for hundreds of years. This is not just about the civil rights movement. This goes back to the very foundation of how this country was founded. We don't whitewash our history anymore. We know that we took land from another race. And then some of our founding fathers participated in something that was happening globally at the time. Slavery goes back to the Egyptians and the Israelites. It goes back even further in that. The Medes and the Persians would conquer. It was something that happened globally, and it was tribal for a long time. It became a race issue in this country. It was less of a race issue in history, if you really do your research. Where it became a race issue was here in the United States. And so I think as a country, what we're seeing now is a boiling point where we have to own the challenges that our history has created. And for years, there's a community, the Black community, that has asked for us to really hear that message. And it's obvious through the challenges that we see happening in a number of areas in life, including law enforcement. It is absolutely obvious that change has to happen. And so now we have movements that are asking for us to hear them. And I'm going to talk about how the 6 human needs play a role in all of this. But I'm going to start by telling you why I care so much. So the lady in the middle of this picture is my mother, and she might actually be behind us right now. We're out at the family farm. This is her at Woodstock. Now, this is a very, very famous photo, and it's been shared in Time Magazine. It's been shared around the world. My mom in the 50s and 60s, as a teenager and moving into her 20s, fought in the civil rights movement. She was a very peaceable person. She believed in equality. And I remember growing up in upstate New York, and my mom would hide like the Black Panthers in our basement. In the 70s and in the early 80s, they were kind of fighting some of their last big pieces in New York City because there were challenges in New York in the early 80s. We grew up in a home where my mother taught us to appreciate and respect other cultures. And we moved from New York right into the deep South to Virginia when I was a kid. And so I was faced with challenges of me having friends and a very diverse group of people around me, and hearing things said around me that shocked me that I didn't understand. And I made a choice very early, very, very early on, that I wasn't going to allow that to happen. Not around me. To tell you how diverse my mother chose to make our life. My brother, my sister, and myself actually all went to a historically Black college, and we were immersed in other cultures, very much so on purpose. We all attended Norfolk State University for a while, and I have a passion for this because I've seen the pain and the challenge that my friends went through, that my teammates went through. I've been pulled over in cars where I've firsthand experienced the challenges that, look, systemic racism have presented to some of my best friends in the world, who I'm still friends with to this day. And my friends were confused because I tend to take a pretty conservative political stance. And then all of a sudden, I was just shouting at the top of my lungs when I saw what happened to George Floyd. And they were like, wait, because people make the mistake of making civil rights a political issue. And while politics play a role, you have politics and then you have civil rights. You have politics and you have social justice. You have politics and you have what's right and wrong. And it's that simple. We're at a point where a community is asking us for help in what's right. And while some may agree or disagree with the official Black Lives Matter organization, I'm not highlighting the organization today. I'm highlighting the principle. And I saw this the other day, and it just so highlighted the need for all of us to speak up and give voice to the Black community. We said Black Lives Matter. We never said only Black Lives Matter. We know all lives matter. We just need your help with Black Lives Matter, because Black lives are in danger right now. If you let that sink in, they're highlighting. I don't know if any of you saw Michael Che's video. I was talking about this with Eugene and Sarah earlier. Michael Che, one of the funniest guys, currently out there. Saturday Night Live, has done an extremely good job of building his career, and he's very good at impersonations. He did a bit on Black Lives Matter, and he leaned into talking about this idea that when we talk about race, and I loved how he put it, he's like, they say, look, we had 400 years of slavery in this country. We're like, oh, well, that was history. You say, oh, what about the civil rights movement? Well, you got Black History Month out of that. You got February. He's like, okay, well, what about police shootings? Oh, that was 2 weeks ago. And everybody wants to dismiss and have this community kind of just forget all of these challenges that they faced. 9/11, never forget. Think about that for a minute. He said he wanted to get a t-shirt that said all buildings matter. Now, for those of you that live in New York, let that sink in. If we don't highlight the specificity of the challenges that 17% of our country face, like globally they face challenges as well, but African Americans, the Black community make up anywhere from 17 to 20% of our country. 1 in 5 people, right? We want to make sure that they don't fear a police officer pulling up behind them. They don't fear, sending their child out at night in fear that the police may mistake them for somebody and they end up in a challenging situation or, God forbid, death, like Breonna Taylor. This is why they need our help. They're asking for it. They're crying for it. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the principle feather brick truck. You tickle somebody with a feather to get their attention. And if the feather doesn't work, then you throw a brick. And if the brick doesn't get their attention, you hit them with a truck. And so the challenge is today, the Black community needed a truck. And we all have to understand why that truck got used and start to help them understand how we want to lean in and that we might not know how. This leans into the 6 human needs. And here's what I want to say. A re-entry from COVID is a 6 human needs challenge. It's a 6 human needs opportunity. Us embracing hard conversations so that we can help people in our communities move forward also is a 6 human needs conversation. So with COVID, I'll be very brief and I'll say this. All of you spend 8, 10, 12 hours a day at your work, in your job, running your businesses, leading organizations. And for 2.5 months, the primary vehicle that meets probably all of these needs was either adjusted or completely taken away. And after 60 days, your habits change. Your work definitely meets your need for certainty at a high level, meets your need for variety for many of us at a high level, meets our need for significance when we win deals and when we grow it at a high level. Many times it meets our need for connection with customers and coworkers and employees at a high level, meets our need for connection, right? With those of us that help us build. And it definitely meets our need for growth and for many of us contribution. And for 2 months, a whole lot of people, whether it was you or your family or people in your community, they were removed from that vehicle that met their needs at a high level. So it shook things up. So now's the time where we have to understand from a 6 human needs perspective, if people feel foggy or they're having a hard time adjusting, it's our job as leaders to understand and appreciate their world with this insight and help get them back. And for those of us who are feeling a little foggy or disoriented, the primary vehicle that you spend 8 to 12 hours a day in that met all of your needs got adjusted for a couple months. You've got to really sit down and look at your daily habits and form a plan to help your re-entry meet all of your needs at the highest level. That being said, how is this working in the community? Right? Well, when it comes to these needs, we all find vehicles to meet them. With certainty, we can meet our need for certainty through smoking, right? Because in that moment, it calms your body, or any other vice, or you can meet your need through meditation and quieting your mind. You have a whole community of people right now who would love to step out of their door and feel certain that they're safe, that they're accepted, that they get to enjoy the same freedoms that everybody else does. And when you watch a police officer put his knee on the neck of someone in your community and murder him in front of 3 other police officers, it's going to rattle your certainty a little bit. It's going to rattle your certainty in your safety, in your freedom, in you believing that you're protected, in your neighbor who used to be friendly. Because if you can't trust the police, who can you trust? The very people who took an oath to protect and serve. So from a certainty standpoint, it ripped certainty emotionally from most of the Black community. And for that, most communities of color, period. We all want a little variety and uncertainty in our life too. You had millions, if not billions of people that were locked in their house with no variety other than what else was on Netflix or Hulu for 2.5 to 3 months. You want something else to do? Protests sound good. It's different than what I've been doing for 2.5 months. But even within the protests, you have some people that want to protest peacefully, and then there's a whole variety of emotion that shows up. all the way to rioting, burning things down, going after the man, whether the man's Target or a police station, right? So understanding and appreciating that perspective can help you stop judging it for a moment and say, okay, if I can understand and appreciate that, how do I lean in to start to be part of the solution with this group? That doesn't mean that we condone rioting or burning down buildings and tearing down businesses that people have built for years. It does not mean that. I'm saying you have to get to a place where you can understand and appreciate it, because if you judge it, you can't change it. If you judge it, you can't change it. You're not going to find leverage through judgment in helping to shift perspectives and find alignment. Judgment's not going to get you there. Significance. So my job has been taken away. My standing as a citizen in the country has been taken away. I'm sorry, my basic human rights feel like they've been taken away because I see myself or my son or my mother or my sister through the eyes and the life of Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery or George Floyd. I see my dad with his knee. I see my cousin get gunned down in a street for running. I see my sister being shot by police because they're in the wrong house. I no longer, as a person of color or as a community, feel significant. So what am I going to do? Well, you can go and take the mic. That didn't go well for Kanye at the time. Or you can lean in and help. We're all going to make a choice to feel significant. And listen, when for 400 years you said we shouldn't be treated this way, and then for 80 years, with organization through Martin Luther King and other leaders, Jesse Jackson, Malcolm X, you try to throw a brick and you communicate and you say, hey, we can't be treated this way. Like eventually you have to do something significant to get the attention of the people that you're trying to speak to. And so when we look at civil rights protests and we see them escalate, by the way, I showed Mandela earlier. Understand, Mandela was respected because he understood that there was a place for violence and civil rights. I know a lot of people want to quote him as being a peaceful man. I have to interject that he wasn't always peaceful. He remained vigilant in peace as often as he possibly could, but he understood that at times violence might be necessary. Now, we look at him as a man who created massive change. So we have to look at the ideology as a whole and say, if I'm judging this, am I missing the point? Is there something valid to this energy that's being put in our communities? Because it's just energy. All communication is an expression of love or cry for help. How uncertain and insignificant does somebody have to feel to go destroy their own community or the community next door? Probably pretty bad. But if we can understand and appreciate that, then we can enter a conversation where they feel like they're heard and felt. We all want love and connection. And so if you can't connect with your neighbor or your coworkers, what do? You group into protests. You go find other like-minded people because you feel so disconnected to all of those other needs that this is a safe place. I'll tell you, I was really, really pissed and I went and joined a couple protests. I got out on the street, put a mask on, went and joined. I was upset. I didn't burn any buildings down, but I definitely went out and voiced that I didn't feel that the approach that was taken by any of these law enforcement officers was appropriate or valid in any way, and that massive change needed to happen. Growth. If through social movements they create change, more freedoms, more security, it's growth. And so understand that even through protest, those actions are meeting their needs. So if we want to understand and appreciate how a whole community across the country, across the world, you look at the protests in New Zealand, in the UK, this is happening across the world, in France, right? People crave these last two needs of growth and contribution, and protest and civil rights and moving towards justice feed those needs. And if we want to enter the conversation, especially from the white community, we have to understand and appreciate how this movement and this voice meets their needs in a healthy way. and how we can enter that conversation to understand and appreciate it. And if we want leverage to be able to also influence the conversation healthfully with understanding and cooperation, the 6 human needs help us get there. Tony's brilliance in conflict negotiation is to ask anyone in any challenging situation, no matter your judgment or your viewpoint, to sit back and really push yourself to understand and appreciate someone else's model of the world. And then ask yourself, how are their actions and their convictions meeting their needs? And if you can find a way to meet their needs at the same level or higher, you can begin to influence the situation. And so we have to look and say, how do we, as a community, help the Black community find their certainty again, that this is a safe country for their families? The variety in enjoying being with us and not being in fear. How do we help them feel significant, a sense of self-worth? How do we help them move past, feeling disconnected into love and connection everywhere they go because of the pain that they're experiencing as a community? And how do we ensure that our communities have growth and contribution at their foundations so that we give back to everyone that's around us? I think these are the questions that we have to answer. And we look at it from a 6 human needs standpoint when we use a technology that's universal, because Tony tested this, not just in the US, but in countries all over the world. Tony says it all the time. I've traveled the world for 40 years and I've spoken to millions of people and it's been my laboratory, right? We hear that all the time. We know that these tools work, but we have to get out of the minutia of maybe the political conversations for a minute and ask ourselves as leaders, not as politicians, not as people with an opinion or a judgment, as leaders, how do we step back and look at basic human needs and make sure that we're leaning in and supporting our brothers and sisters, our friends in the community, right? Talked earlier about winter is our season, and we take this moniker on of gladiators. And I believe that we need to be gladiators for our business in a financial winter, but we also need, in some instances, to be gladiators and not run from this conversation, right? Gladiators don't run, they fight. They slay dragons, they wipe the blood off, they stitch up their wounds, and they live to fight another day. Right now, our battle is injustice, it's inequality, it's racism. And we have to face that dragon not only externally with them, but internally in ourselves, and dig deep and ask ourselves where we've been complicit, where we've not spoken up, where we've fallen short of supporting, making sure that the Black community, communities of color, feel included, supported, and equal in every aspect, and safe in their communities, safe in being able to send their kids out for a Friday night without fear, right? I think it just boils down to sometimes things being that simple. And remember this, we're putting out energy. I love this piece from Einstein. Everything is energy. And that's all there is to it. Match the frequency of the reality you want, and you cannot help but get that reality. It can be no other way. This is not philosophy. This is physics. What's the energy that we're putting out? Is it an energy of leaning in and giving support when people are shouting, driving a truck in front of us asking for it? Or are we going to wait for another one? Because I don't know anything after feather brick truck. There's nothing else after truck in what I learned. So this is it. This is the time where we have to take a stand and give voice. And it's okay to say, I don't know what to do. It's okay to literally look in the eyes of people who are struggling and say, I don't know what to do, but I'm here. I don't know what to do. Help me understand. And then listen. And not listen just for an education, not intellectual listening. We're going to have emotional listening, physical listening, where we accept that change in our body completely. I used to teach life and wealth mastery. And there was a gentleman who would speak at Life Master every year in a wheelchair. His name was Art Berg. And unfortunately, Art's passed. But he says something that I love. He says, well, the difficult takes time. The impossible just takes a little longer. For us, the difficult conversation is facing the things that we don't know, facing our blind spots, facing the things that we have willingly or unwillingly been complicit in and contributing to the challenges for communities of people of color. And I think all of us on the side of what's just and what's right, who would champion civil rights, would say that it's been difficult and it's taken time. And for some that feels impossible, just know that maybe it takes a little longer, but it will happen. And it takes leadership, real leadership, people to step up and have a voice. It takes real leadership. Leadership is losing some of your customer base or fan base because you take a stance for what's right. That's leadership. Not worrying about whether you split a community, but taking a stance and having some conviction. You know, I've watched companies that have strong social presence take a stance, and you see the comments, people say, I'm leaving. And they say, listen, perfectly fine, this is our stance. That's leadership. Being willing to hold your conviction that you believe is just and right. I think we all need to do that. So we've got some time for some Q&A. I'm going to ditch the screen share and move into some Q&A. And I saw some comments. Let's see.
Mike, I just want to jump in for a second.
Yes.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation. If you click on the Q&A button, Marsha Andrews had a question. It's I think anytime that, you know, any conversation of substance comes up, there's some tough talk to be had. And
Yes.
Marsha's got a really solid question. And for everyone else, we're in the Q&A portion. So if you want to drop a comment or a question in the chat box, I see there's 2 people that have their hand raised. I'm not sure if that's an accident, or if you want, I'm happy to unmute you or to invite you on as a panelist, and you can, you know, put on your video and we're happy to have a conversation. So this is the fun part. This is the interactive part. So Sandy and Arar, I'm sorry if I said that incorrectly, just type into the chat if you want me to bring your video on or turn your audio on. Let me know how you want me to get to you guys. Otherwise, I'm just going to assume you raised your hand by accident. No, not everyone's Zoom relative. But guys, like you have someone here that, you know, spent 40 years, 30 years studying under Tony Robbins, you know, influencing and having powerful conversations with people. I think whether you have a question about how to navigate your emotions, how to, you know, what you could be doing within your internal construct, or you just have any questions or want to challenge anything Mike has said, this is meant to be open. Everything's welcome. So let's start with Marsha. Mike, do you see Marsha's question in the Q&A?
I do. Yeah. So Marsha
Cool.
Andrews, first of all, thank you.
Yeah, can you just read it to everyone first? So that everyone
so her
knows,
question, she said, Michael, you say you tend to be conservative. I want to understand, how does this jive with all you've said? In my interpretation, conservatives want to take women's rights away, voting rights away. They support the most unkind man in the White House who only denigrates human beings, no matter who they are, at every turn. To me, being conservative means you would vote to keep all these restrictions and inhumane treatments in place. Again, I want to understand, did I mishear you? You did not mishear me, but I'm going to address a couple of these points for sure. So Marsha, first of all, thank you. And this is the challenge in the polarization that we see, where the farthest right holds to a lot of the things that you show in the question. And you're absolutely right in that. They do hold to the furthest right, hold to that. And the furthest left hold to extreme views that most Democrats and most liberals would never, ever lean into as well. I find myself, if I had to define what it's more like a libertarian, I don't know. I don't like the fact that we have a 2-party system. Tony says when you have one option, you have no option at all. 2 options is a dilemma. 3 options, now you got choice. And I to this day think we need 3 and 4 more options when it comes to party. What I mean by conservative is I was raised in a household where my father was an accountant for the Pentagon and my mother was a hippie. And so you can only imagine that there were some interesting conversations in the house. And I have found over the years that I fight very hard for social change, for work at the community level. You will always find me at community meetings. I get engaged in supporting a lot of like mayoral and city council candidates to move into seats that I believe accurately represent their communities. And that's a lot of what you might find hardcore liberals doing. Yet when it comes to finance, when it comes to economics, when it comes to capitalism, I tend to lean more towards what would be considered a conservative view. I was a missionary at one point in my life, and while I will not beat someone over the head with a Bible, there are principles that are found in the Hebrew and Greek scriptures that I do use as a guidepost for my life. And you find in a lot of churches, and by the way, I've mostly led campaigns in the Black community for Black candidates. So I've spent a whole lot of time at Black churches, and you find that they take a conservative view from the pulpit, but then individually vote liberal. And what I love about that is that they tend to find themselves in the same place. I don't ever vote on party lines. I vote based on what candidate I believe is going to bring the greatest change needed in the country at the time. When I say conservative, it means I tend to lean towards more conservative values, and I don't mean politically conservative. I just mean conservative in terms of life. I do appreciate capitalism, conservative values. I can't say that I hated everything that Trump brought to the table. I'm not going to lie to you. But do I agree with everything you wrote in that comment? At this point, I do. You know, while somebody has a skill set to run a business, it doesn't mean they have the emotional quotient to run maybe a country. Now, you know, leadership leans in. Leadership comes to the table and has a conversation even when it's hard. And Marsha, I will tell you that I understand exactly what your fears would be in hearing a message like this from someone who says they're conservative. And that's why I appreciate your question so much. I live in a very interesting space as someone who's been a business owner, that I've seen, unfortunately, the politics from both parties mess with how small and medium-sized businesses can grow in their communities. And over the years, conservative politics have protected small and medium-sized businesses in being able to do good work economically, to hire and create jobs and turn their communities around. I believe that the answer from a political standpoint is that we need a third party that represents a little bit from both sides, the best of both sides. And I agree with you that right now, for somebody to call themselves a conservative would mean that they might lean into those things that you mentioned, but that is definitely not where I'm at. So I hope that clarifies the question, not only for you, but maybe some other folks that were on the call. So Greg Sugarman, are we going to Greg next? I see a question from Greg.
Yeah,
And you also had,
let's do Greg.
so
Marsha, thank you. Marsha says
first of all,
thank you
Marsha,
so much.
you.
Whew, love it. Thanks, Marsha.
All right,
Let's
so
actually, no, I'm sorry. Hold on a minute. We have two hands up for a while. I got Sandy. Sandy, I'm going to press allow to talk. Sandy, we can hear you if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question. Sandy Gansberg. Get your hand up. Would you like to?
do we need to unmute?
I don't
There
have
we
a
go.
question. I don't know how
You do not have a question. Okay.
But
Oh,
I
I'm sorry.
did
Yeah,
enjoy
go
your
for it.
speaking. Yes. Sorry.
No, you're good. Anything you want to share, you're welcome. You got the floor.
All right. Someone else had their hand up as well, or are we going to Greg?
Yeah. Let's go to one more.
Uh-huh.
And, disable talking. Okay. Let's go. Nope, I already put his hand down. Okay. So let's go to Greg.
Greg, great
Sugarman.
question. I'm looking at this. First of all, hi, Greg. Secondly, Greg said, my question is about maintaining a positive state when it seems we're in a political climate where literally truth is under attack. We're bombarded with conflicting points of view all the time. Example, if you say 2 + 2 = 4, there are now a loud and vocal group of people to present their case that no, it isn't. Yes, it's I can't remember. What was it called? Common Core? You're absolutely right. As a parent, I was afraid of that. No, I'm teasing. To me, it can become challenging at times to maintain my vibe and good energy when it seems like everyone's fighting all the time and everyone is sure they're right. Guilty of it as well. All right. So first of all, thank you for your honesty there. The everyone is right thing, I'm just going to give everybody a term to look up: confirmation bias, right? So sometimes we will go look for the information. That unfortunately means we want to be right, and we go find the information that will make us right. And today, if you use Google, you can go find an article that confirms your bias, right? What you have to do is take a pause and consider other perspectives in that. So first of all, thank you for that. How do you maintain your state? So listen, one thing is, even Tony will tell you, don't be Pollyanna, right? There's no reason to act like nothing challenging is happening. But you can sit in a state where you say, like, I have to choose how I'm going to be in this moment. If Viktor Frankl could choose to maintain a positive state while in concentration camps, right? When we look at mankind's search for meaning, if Viktor Frankl could find the good in that, we can find the good in this. Now, it may mean you have to choose to be careful who you surround yourself with for a little while. It may mean you have to have a hard conversation with someone to say, listen, I know you have conviction around this. It's just not something I want in my space at the moment. And it's okay. If you don't feel like you can control that, you know, we could chill another time. It may feel like you have to look at someone and say, I understand your conviction is different than mine. That's one thing that we don't agree on. We agree on 99%. Let's move on. You may have to own creating a space around you that does feel good. You also have to filter the amount of time you spend in the news and social media. I know I said that earlier, but be very, 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 very careful. And you don't have to block people that are friends, but you can mute them. You can take certain people whose voices seem a bit extreme or who may trigger you a little bit and just mute them so they don't show up. The other piece is this, is, you know, gratitude. Tony has said this for years. The attitude of gratitude overcomes all sorts of challenge. So Greg, make sure that you're back to a strong gratitude practice. You know, Tony has videos out about priming. Prime yourself with gratitude every single day. And I learned years ago through, you know, Tony incorporated like tapping techniques and things, emotional freedom technique. There's language in that that's powerful. I remember when we were going through the emotional freedom technique, they used to say things like, even if I'm stressed in this moment, I still love and appreciate all of myself. Even if I'm going through challenge in this moment, I still love and appreciate everything about it. So instead of, you know, avoiding it, because what we resist persists, we accept it. Even though the world is crazy right now, I am so grateful for my life. Even though communities are challenged, I'm so grateful and I'm so blessed. Right? So making sure that we're not Pollyanna, we don't avoid, but we do block and tackle a little bit, number one. Two, priming with gratitude, gratitude, gratitude. And if need be, incantations that embrace the challenge and then also bring in the things you have access to. So hopefully those are a couple tips that can help. I say priming, 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 and more priming. And if you're really feeling stressed, shameless commercial, go to Dallas in August, go to UPW, come party with us.
Yeah, man, it's so good, Mike. And it's so important. Like when I talk to the team about this very topic, time priming, it's as if when we wake up, we're hijacked. We're hijacked by all the content we consume all day long, and opinions are being made up for us if we're not creating them ourselves. And so it's like what you know, making sure to consume the right content, you know, visually or auditory, and then getting your physiology into a good state. It's almost like your armor for the day. Now you become bulletproof for the day, right? Like,
yes.
And I want to chime in about, you know, in this piece of, you know, that was about a total agreement of staying guard at the gates of your mind. Because if you're not feeding yourself content, if you're not looking at the right things, wrong things are going to find their way in. They're going to get downloaded, you know, accidentally. And, you know, especially in the piece of leadership, like, I mean, I love that you brought up Mandela. As you know, he's one of my biggest role model. Greg made a comment in the chat about Nelson Mandela. And, you know, look, this is a guy that was incarcerated and tortured and urinated on for 3 decades. And when he came out, his whole message was reconciliation, not revenge. He understood that the only way forward was together. And actually, he took some of his captors and put them in his cabinet just to serve as a primary example that it's not about revenge. And, you know, there's an interview he did and he was asked, like, how'd you do it? You know, like, how did you let go of 30 years of, you know, these emotions? And his answer was so profound. He said, like, look, if I had left prison and left with those emotions, then I had never really left prison. I needed to leave those emotions behind. And, you know, his whole slogan was, I mean, I visited Africa with Julian. It was amazing. The whole thing was reconciliation, not revenge. And, you know, I think we can subscribe to some of that now about, you know, the only way forward is together. You know, it's whatever happened. Change is obviously necessary, but the only way forward is together. We got some more questions here, which I'd love to get to. Thank you guys for your questions. Keep them coming. Question comes from, well, actually, there are comments. Awesome. Great job tonight. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you, Greg. Haha, be your 4th UPW. Thank you again, Greg. Guys, anybody else? Anybody have a question for a mic, or anybody want to come on, I can put on your audio, your video. You want to share an experience, you want to share a thought, a distinction, maybe anything you took away that was really valuable for you. Anybody have anything they want to contribute, share, ask? Now is the time. Otherwise, we'll start to wrap up. See you, Greg. Thanks for joining. All right. Well, in that case, I guess we will wrap up. Mike Savage, thank you so much for your profound insights.
Thank you.
For your service for the last 30 years. Like obviously this isn't it's not your first rodeo. I'm very proud to call you a friend and my personal, business and personal coach. Thanks a lot, man. Appreciate it. Everyone that jumped in, thank you for joining. Be well, be safe, stand guard at the gates of your mind, people. All right, guys. Be well, everyone. Have a good one.
Thank you, guys.